Yay. All right, everybody. How are we all doing today? Doing good, 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 good? Good, I'm glad to hear it, glad to hear it. Me too, had a, let me fix this subtitle thing. Had a kind of a long week. I had quite a bit going on with my family. My father had a stroke, and so dealing with that took a couple days that normally I would be spending on this. So pardon me that some of my slides are kind of not as pretty or as bountiful as normal. I didn't get as much time to work on the lesson as I normally do. He's okay. He's actually doing quite well considering. They said that it wasn't a traditional stroke. It was caused by a blood clot, which had traveled to that part of his brain, got lodged there, and basically burst the blood vessel like a traditional stroke. But because it wasn't caused by problems with his brain or what traditionally causes a stroke, they don't think he's going to have another one. Whereas, normally you have a stroke, it's usual to have more than one. But with this kind of stroke, unless he has another clot, he's unlikely to have another stroke. So God definitely looking out for him. And the doctor said, and luckily, and I'm thinking there is no such thing, but go ahead, let me hear what you got to say. She said, luckily, had the blood clot gone anywhere other than where it went, even an inch different, anywhere other than where it went, in that part of his brain, would have either killed him or he'd have been a vegetable. Her words, he would have never wiped again. And so, again, God graciously took care of him and gave him more time. Now, my sister and my mother and him and everybody was upset and concerned. And that's normal, right? We all get worried and upset. But I tried to tell them, turn to God, give it to him. Don't let this, because you're making all these things, you're getting upset and you're allowing this to upset you, and that's not helping him, it's not helping you. So give it to God and let him work on it. And you don't worry about it. You can't do anything about it anyway. So thankfully, things worked out well. But again, ate up a bunch of my time. So pardon me that some of the slides are not as they are. Yeah, he lives in Moncks Corner. He doesn't live far from me. I brought him to church a few times. But with my mom being ill, he hasn't come like he used to. He used to be pretty faithful, come every week like I do. But with mom being sick, he at one point wouldn't leave her because she had issues and burnt down their kitchen, basically, burnt down their house almost. So he's kind of not wanted to leave her, and I understand that. I get that. But she's doing better too now, so hopefully I can get both of them back here, or back to church. So please pardon me for that. We are, of course, still in Proverbs. We've gone to now the 10th chapter of Proverbs, and as I mentioned to you, what I planned on doing was, because of the way it's laid out, these are just one-liners, is I would group up some like Proverbs, and then we would study them in a group. So what I found is the very first Proverb, 10:1, as we'll see, deals with the foolish son and the wise son, right? Or the wise son and the foolish son. And so I searched for all the other Proverbs in anywhere from 10 to 29, chapter 29, that dealt with those same subjects or had those same things with it. There's quite a few, but it's about 14 total that we'll be studying. But by doing that, it gives us a good breadth of what does God want us to know about these two subjects. What is a foolish son? What is a wise son? And how do they affect the family? How does your children being foolish or wise affect you as a parent? And we'll see a lot of that through these Proverbs. Before we begin, though, who can start us off with prayer? You got it, Joey? Oh, good.
All right. Our Heavenly Father, just thank you for our love and care for us. Thank you for allowing us to be back in your house today. Thank you for Brother Charles and the lesson he's not bringing. And I pray that you would open our hearts to receive your word, Father, and supply our lives. And we want to Christ this week. It's your name we pray.
Thank you. Awesome. I do have a couple jokes. These are better, I promise. I know I bombed last week horribly, so I went extra long on trying to find good ones for here. Oops, wrong file. That's great. Bear with me. I got to grab the right file. There we go. Here it comes. All right, here it is. Okay, now let me start this from the beginning. Subtitles, there we go, and swap. Sorry, a little tech difficulty there. I don't know why I didn't save it in both files, but oh well, it is what it is. Okay, one summer evening during a violent thunderstorm, a mother was tucking her small boy into bed, and she was about to turn off the lights when he asked, he was kind of scared because it was thundering pretty hard, and he kind of had a tremor in his voice. He said, "Mommy, will you sleep with me tonight?" And the mother smiled and gave him a reassuring hug and said, "I can't, dear. I have to sleep in Daddy's room tonight." And long silence went after her saying that. She's about to leave out, and she heard him say in a shaky little voice, "That big sissy." All right. So second one, Titus, a young minister's son, was watching his father labor over writing Sunday sermon, right? Every week he wrote Sunday sermon, and he always watched his dad do this, right? And so one day he says to him, Titus says, "Daddy, I thought you said God tells you what to say every Sunday." "And he does," replied the minister. "He does, son, he does." And then his son Titus said, "Well, then how come you cross out so much of what he says?" All right, so that's two. All right. All right. All right, one more. And this one's really good. It's one of my favorite jokes. A very old man was lying in his bed, and he was near death, right? He was in a very bad shape, in death's doorway, so to speak. But he suddenly smelled, while he's laying in bed there, the aroma of his favorite chocolate chip cookies wafting up the stairs. And so he gathered his remaining strength. He lifted himself up out of bed, and leaning against the wall, he slowly made his way down the stairs from the bedroom to the kitchen. Made his way out of the bedroom, and even greater effort, he forced himself down those stairs, gripping the railing with both hands. With labored breath, he leaned against the door frame. He gazed into the kitchen. Were it not for death's agony, he would have thought himself already in heaven. Because right there, spread out on newspapers, on the kitchen table, were literally hundreds of his favorite chocolate chip cookies. Was it heaven? Or was this one final act of devotion from his loving wife? Seeing to it that he must, leave this world a happy man. Mustering great effort, he threw himself towards the table. His aged and withered hand shook as it made its way to a cookie at the edge of the table. When suddenly, smack! A spatula hit him on the hand. And his wife said, "Stay out of those. Those are for the funeral." All right. So that's our jokes for the day. Yeah.
The fact that you like it so much, that says something about it.
I know, right? I like it. It's got a good twist. All right. So, again, today we're on to the 10th chapter of Proverbs. So I'm going to read out a couple, and then I'll have somebody else read out the last two on the screen here. I don't have them coming up in a separate slide like normal. Again, I didn't have time. And unfortunately, that's kind of blocking it a little bit, but they're on the screen. It's 10:1, 15:20, 23:24, and 13:1. So I'll read 10:1 and 15:20. Who'd like to read? And then somebody read for me after. The Proverbs of Solomon: a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. And then the second one: a wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. Who'd like to read the last two for me? All right.
The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. The 13 one?
Yeah, read 13:1.
A wise son hears his father's instructions, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke.
Very good, thank you.
So the opening 9 chapters of Proverbs are basically an opening address for what we're about to get into now. And that is all these, some people call them masterly sayings or one-liners, right? Or wisdom, words of wisdom. Weighty sayings, another thing people call them. But these are really the Proverbs they start out with, the Proverbs Solomon wrote himself. And so much of this is Solomon's own wisdom that we're about to read, right? And many of these he wrote with the thought in mind of his son, right? Because his son would inherit the kingdom that he, at that time, was king over, right? So many of these were, and if you look at it from that lens and realize many of these were for his own son's instruction and how to be a better father, a better man, a better king. And so these were all primarily, that was, I'm sure, a lot of the reason for his writing them down. And a great part of, all of our journeys with Christ involves our children, does it not? We're always looking for, as Christian parents, ways to help them see the world for what it is and God for what he is, right? And the difference between the two. And how to live in the world that we live in and yet still exalt God and do God's work. Just like us, Solomon wanted to teach his children the right things. He wanted his children to grow up with a knowledge of God and quite frankly, again, the fear of the Lord. But not fear in so much being afraid of him, but fear is in respect of the Lord and his place in their life, in our lives. And it's, parents are instructed to use all possible means to make their children wise. But a lot of times we think, well, how can I do this? I'm not the one that gives the wisdom. God does, as the Bible tells us. And that's true, but he makes use of us as well in that process in order to teach our children. And so, as we instruct them and pray for them and do different things to help them see God's word, God himself is using us in that manner to train them up, so to speak, right? And as it says in another proverb we're going to read a little later, train up a child in the way wherein he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And so that's ultimately what we as Christians are doing, as well as what Solomon was doing. We're hoping that by teaching our children these things, that it will serve them the rest of their life. Which is, again, something that we know part of Awana's mission is that exact same thing, is to give children verses that they might be able to lean on later in life to help their way. Be wise, seek knowledge, search for it as hidden treasure. These are things that we want our children to know. Walk in fear of the Lord. Let prudence and discretion appear in every part of your conduct as well. And the reason why is your children will learn more from you, the way they see you live, than they are from anything you tell them. So your conduct, the fact that you are looking for God's wisdom as a hidden treasure is as much instruction as telling them that. So make sure, it's as we mentioned last week, you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. As a parent, you most especially have an audience that is closer to you than anyone else, and that's your children. Your children know you better than anyone else, more than likely. And so they're going to see all the good, the bad, and the indifferent, right? So you want to make sure that audience to your children is one that you would feel comfortable with it being to anyone. Because if it's not, then something's wrong. Then you need to think about that. Why is it? Why can your kids see something you're not willing for everybody else to see? It should be the same. If you feel uncomfortable, you should figure out why you feel uncomfortable and fix that. Because if you're comfortable with ultimately your kids seeing it, you should be comfortable with the world seeing it. Does that make sense? That ultimately be who you want them to be, right? Don't just tell them who you want them to be. Be who you want them to be. And if you do, I promise you, it's a huge difference between a child that sees a parent telling them what to do and living what they're telling them what to do. They're going to listen more, I promise you. They're going to learn more from it that way. And they're going to see practical examples in a real life that way. Rather than, we all know book learning, right? You learn more from doing. You learn more from experience. The same thing is true with your children. They're going to learn more from doing, more from experience with you teaching them through your effort rather than just through your instruction. But to kind of look at these different verses here a little more closely and kind of go over them. After the previous general description of wisdom that we had in chapter 9, Solomon begins with what is uppermost in his mind. What would be the character of his successor, his child, right? What would become of his throne, his wealth, his people after himself. So Solomon has one son, Rehoboam, and this thought lies pretty much underneath many of the sayings in Proverbs that we see. And every son should be an Abner, right? His father's light. Every daughter should be Abigail, her father's joy. But just as much as Eve promised herself much in Cain, and David didn't like with Absalom, sometimes you're disappointed, right? You're deceived by what the child is doing versus what you think they're doing, right? You've led them, you've brought them up as to be good, and yet they sometimes don't do what you expect them to do. They don't do good, right? Just like Absalom tried to steal the kingdom from David, even though he was his child. And even though Cain killed Abel, right? They weren't brought up to be that way, and yet sometimes that occurs. But of course, that's why Solomon and us have to try very hard to educate our children and make sure that they are taught more by our action than our words. And every young person, of course, also should think about this, that this is part of their journey as well, is learning from their parents. And I know it's, my daughter is especially does the, oh, you're old, she does all that, right? And I know we've all heard that from our kids. But at the same time, I can see there are times that she's listened to me because I see her actions. And they tell that she has heard what I've had to say. So you'd be surprised what they hear, even though they tell you they don't. So we're making an investment, really, in our children. And it's not always going to have an immediate return. It may not be a return you see right away, but it is a return you will see eventually. But you've got to keep putting in the effort. You've got to keep putting in the investment. When you're playing stocks in the stock market and they say the stock goes down, what do they teach? Double down, buy more. Do the same with your child. When the stock goes down, when they're doing wrong, invest more. Don't invest less, invest more. That should be your cue that I need to do more when they're doing those things that are opposite of what they know to do. And ultimately, you have to lead the family, never letting that relax, the opportunity to learn. So, 10:1. How much more our joy and sorrow in this world depend upon our relationships, right? In proportion to the wise are related to the foolish, right? So in other words, what I'm saying there is plenty of us have people in our families that are both wise and foolish, right? And because of that, it can really cause a lot of sorrow in relationships, right? When you have somebody that acts foolishly in a family, sometimes it can cause hurt, right? It can cause hurt feelings. And so ultimately, these relationships are some, again, like I mentioned earlier, some of the closest relationships you have are with family and your children. They know you better than anyone else. And so distant relationships are not as effective in your life as a near relationship is, and how powerful they can be in your life. And the relation of a parent to a child is in some respects, like I say, even nearer, or to that of a husband or a wife. Depends on the situation. Our children are part of ourselves, and they are what make or mars our lives, right? How much, when we say my, that pronoun carries a lot of weight, doesn't it, when you're talking about my child or my daughter versus someone else's daughter. You ultimately are proud of that child. And it's someone that you, of course, have more love for than just the average person, obviously, right? You love your children with all your heart. You're going to love them differently than somebody else. But ultimately, good parents obviously are going to always, that's going to be the way it is. Now, there are exceptions, obviously, and that's sad, but there are. There are those that don't teach their children. There are those that don't give their children these lessons that we're talking about. And we see the result of that in our world today. We're surrounded by it. So we ultimately should look for our joy in training our children. Our joy should come from seeing their growth, seeing their progression, not just the fun stuff that you do. Your joy should come from that. And ultimately, that's what this is teaching us. A wise son makes a glad father. So when you see your son becoming or daughter becoming wise, that should be where you gain your joy from. Because at that point, you realize I've passed on something now that is going to last. You've given them a gift that you can't give them any other way. This is not a gift you buy. It's not a gift that you can just wrap up and hand to somebody. But it's a gift of life that is probably the most important gift you'll ever give your children. So allow that to give you the joy that it should give you. And seek that joy. Seek the joy of knowing that your children are walking in the ways of God. And if they're not, work at it. Do different things to try and do that. And we'll see some of the suggestions that Proverbs give us. But a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. What it's talking about there is obviously we know what folly brings, right? We've studied that several times. Folly brings destruction. Folly brings death sometimes. Folly brings heartache, right? And of course, mothers are very upset when they see their children in distress. And so a foolish son is sorrow to his mother. So that in of itself also, understand, your happiness is a lot tied to how your children take what you teach, right? If they're not taking what you're teaching, if they're running around acting like heathens, crazy and such, right? It makes it very difficult for you to have a happy life, right? And so, again, that's what this is telling us. You should take your effort, especially if you're unhappy, and put it into teaching them how to be wise. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish man despises his mother. And what this is saying is, again, very similar. A wise son brings joy to his father. Same thing. He then sees that the efforts were not wasted. But a foolish man despises his mother. What that's saying there is a foolish person knows he grieves his mother, just like we just talked about. They know that. A foolish son understands that. Many of them know that, but they do it anyway. Right? So is that not somewhat a indication that they despise their mother if they are continually doing something they know brings grief to their mother? So that's what this is telling us, is they're not wholly innocent of it, right? They know what they're doing in many cases. And so, again, understand that. And that can help you, too, to understand sometimes you've just got to accept that they're doing this and they know they're doing it, even though it's wrong. And they know it's wrong. And you've got to show them why it's wrong and how to not do it, right? But don't just accept that they didn't know. Because many times, I know my daughter has done it. I didn't mean to, or it was a joke, or da-da-da. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. That wasn't a joke when it was said. It's a joke now, but it wasn't when it was said, and that's inappropriate, right? So many times they know what they're doing, even though they claim not to. Right? So don't fall into that thought that just because they claim, I didn't know better, that they didn't know better. They should if you've been teaching them anyway, right? So ultimately, don't accept that necessarily as okay. And realize they may be telling you that, just try and get out of it. 23:24, the father of a righteous child has great joy. Again, notice this. All the talk about when your child is righteous, when your child is wise, when your child exhibits all these characteristics, it brings joy to you, and it will. And a man who fathers a wise son rejoices in him. And again, when you have a father-son, father-daughter, a family relationship like that, where it is going well, that son or daughter is learning, and they are coming closer and closer to God, what you'll find is, you'll notice that those people that the husband or wife tend to have a closer relationship with that child. They tend to be closer to them. They are invested more in them. And it's because, again, they're getting joy from that relationship, obviously. And so they're going to be drawn to wanting to do more things with their children and all that, right? And wanting to teach them more because it's bringing them joy. So it's kind of like the ball that rolls downhill. As it catches more and more snow, it gets bigger, right? Same thing here is what this is getting at. As you teach your children to be righteous and wise, it then increases your joy until it gets to a point to where you're now deriving joy simply from spending time with your children. A wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not respond to rebukes. So, and someone asked me last week for a flow chart, and I didn't get time to do it. So I will do it next week when we do stuff like this where it's talking about a mocker does not respond to rebukes. I'll put it more in a flow chart for you so you can see what it's getting at. A wise son heeds his father's instruction. But ultimately here, this verse says that, again, a wise child is going to listen to the instruction they're being given. They're not just going to blow it off. But a mocker does not respond to rebukes. So a person that doesn't respond when you tell them, look, you've done wrong, and they don't respond to that, that's what the Bible terms as a mocker. That's somebody that knows right from wrong, but chooses not to live right from wrong because whatever choice, right? Why ever, we don't know. But ultimately they choose not to. And that goes back to a foolish man despises his mother. They know it's wrong. They know it's causing anguish to their family, and yet they continue to do it. That's a mocker. That's somebody that knows better, but still continues to do wrong. All right. Discussion question. How can we promote wisdom in our homes? Thoughts? Yeah.
I would say that as parents, we're very quick to lose tempers.
Yes.
Especially in the heat of the moment. Guilty, 100%. What I've learned is to take a step back and really just kind of go into certain scripture and just kind of reapproach it, calm and collected, and just try to get on their level and just really open up their eyes to, why are you acting this way?
Sure.
What's going on? And
Sure.
I've seen changes in that.
Good.
By saying, I'm not sure why you think you're going to talk to me like I'm your brother or your sister, but we need to have an understanding. But because I used to yell, and that doesn't get far because if they can't hear you when you're talking, they definitely don't want to hear you when you're yelling.
Nope. And it won't work.
It doesn't.
It won't work.
And even that approach to doing what I'm doing now, sometimes that doesn't work, and that's where you just got to walk away and tell
Sure.
them, we're going to come back and have this discussion.
Sure.
We need to think about this, and I need to calm down a little bit more.
Sure.
So it starts with us, because they're going to see our reaction.
Right.
And then if they think that that's okay to have that reaction, then they're going to carry that on.
Right.
So, and ensuring also that the respect is first and foremost to the parents. That I think that's the biggest thing. Children must show the parents respect.
Sure. Now, a couple things. Excellent points, and absolutely right. Yelling gets you nowhere. And the reason it'll get you nowhere is part of what you were saying too. If they see you do it, then it's okay, right? If you are yelling at them, then why is their reaction any different, right? And so absolutely correct. The other side of that too is, as the person that's looking for respect, you have to be the one that deserves it, right? And so if you deserve respect, does somebody that deserves respect get a good term for it? You're the rock of the home, right? As parents, you're the rock of the home. And a rock doesn't move. A rock isn't moved by emotion, right? A rock is moved by physical things, not emotion. And so when they see you as a rock, their rock moved by emotion, then they in turn are going to get emotional, right? And so by you not being moved by emotion, you keep the emotion down. That helps them to process their own emotions better, right? Because, again, children have a lot of hormones going through their body, right, that they haven't yet learned how to control in many cases. And so it's especially important for you to teach them at a young age that yelling is not a path that's going to get you anywhere. unless you're in a crowded room and need a waiter or something. That's the only time yelling helps you, right? But any other time, it's truly a waste of effort. The other thing that you mentioned there is true too. You've got to, as far as respect, you've got to have the respect of your family. But the way you gain that respect is through action, is through being who you want them to be. Let God be their conscience, right? If you, and it's a great lesson for all of us, that if you are trying to be somebody else's conscience, it's not going to work. You are not God. You can't reach into their brain like he can, right? So don't waste your time with trying to be their conscience. Sure, help them, tell them and guide people, but that doesn't mean be their conscience. You can't, and it's a waste of time. It's going to hurt your relationship with them, including your children. Don't be their conscience, but teach them what is right. Yes?
For me, we've got 5 girls, and every one of them is different. You know,
Yes.
Part of our learning curve is to try to figure out how to get through to this particular
Right.
individual.
Right.
Sometimes raising your voice is a good tool. Not to say you want to yell at them, but just to get their attention. Other kids, you raise your voice and they just go all to pieces. So it's a learning curve, really. We've had to learn over the past 5 or 8 years, how to change our approach
Right.
with different kids.
Right.
And I think, I don't want to say you want to let the world tell you how to parent your kids, but, you know, there's a lot more, and I don't know how you really quantify this either, but there's a lot more so-called anxieties and social problems
Sure.
and things that these kids deal with now that
Sure.
maybe we didn't get a brand stamped on us, ADHD, this, that, the other disorder, you know. So, but in the course of that, I think, you know, there's a lot of newer approaches and tools to things
Sure.
that you can kind of use. You know, I wouldn't say, you know, by any means just throw biblical principles to the side because they very much apply. But sometimes you have to change your approach a little bit to get
Sure.
that particular child to grasp it.
Sure.
Or to at least even open up to hear what you got to say.
Absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and that's very, very wise, actually, to real. And that's important that each child has their own path, so to speak, right? And you're absolutely correct. You've got to find what works for each child because they're different, just like we're all different, right? And what brought you to God isn't what will bring somebody else to God. Same thing for your children, and absolutely very astute, very, very smart. Yes.
Just adding to that, realizing that you've got to choose your words wisely too. Because the things that are important in them, of course, are not necessarily, groundbreaking to you, but you've got to almost treat those things as if they're groundbreaking. And so making sure that when you speak to them, you don't necessarily discount what you're having trouble with and what you're struggling with.
Right.
I've made that mistake and had to, kind of explain that. I didn't mean that this wasn't important. It's
Right.
just there are certain things that take priority over other things because
Sure.
of the fact that you're a child and you're an adult and we're dealing with adult situations. And so making sure that you don't close off their listening by not valuing or
Right.
making light of what is important to them.
Yes.
I think that is, it goes on.
And very important. And what you're talking about there is why you hear so many children say, my parents don't understand me. It's not that they don't understand them, it's they don't listen. You're absolutely right. There are many times that what we perceive to be, what's that? Who cares, right? For them, it's devastating, right? And so be open to understanding that just because it's not important to you doesn't mean it's not important to them. And absolutely right. And again, both of you are speaking about things that we didn't have to deal with as children. Absolutely right. The world today is very fast, it's very fluid, and it's very in your face 24 hours a day. The phones that we all have are a pathway to our children like no other. And they're still doing studies about the potential negative impacts of social media on children. And we're watching it. I mean, I don't have to do a study. I can just look at the world and see that children are being harmed by social media in a bad way. And they are getting to the point to where they are valuing idolatrizing themselves more than a lot of things, right? They are becoming their own self-worship. And they're being taught that not only is that okay, that's normal. And that's what you should do, is self-worship, self-idolize. And if you are not as popular a self-idol as somebody else, then you're doing something wrong. It's your fault, and it's your body, it's your whatever that's wrong, right? All of that is a lie, and it's all designed to do one thing, and it's to tear your children down, to make them rebel, to make them go against you, to make them go against everything. And ultimately, Satan wants them, you know where he wants them. And that's what his purpose is, right? So be careful that you realize that their problems that they have are important. Even if they may not seem like it, they are to them. And so they therefore should be to you. Even if you don't see the value in it when they tell you, see the value in it for their value. Does that make sense? You always look at it as, okay, I don't get it, but that's all right. I don't get it. I'm old, you know? But that's okay. I'll still be invested in it just as they will be, right? Because that's your duty as parents. Yeah.
I was just going to say that social media it destroys families, because the kids watch this stuff. They watch, the biggest thing that the schools failed, in my opinion, is allowing the kids to bring phones to school, because when they're allowed to sit there and record a teacher getting beat up by a student and the teacher can't do nothing about it, or a brother recording his brother beating up his dad and thinking it's funny, because they know that a parent can't discipline like we used to. That's instilling these things in children's heads that, hey, I can do this. There's no repercussions. So it's hard in a home to try to defeat that. I mean, because you can only go so much, but once they're outside the doors, that influences back. So the question is we need to try to do as much as we can to keep them in the Word. But how do you battle those pressures? Because they're going to choose friends over family.
Sure.
How is it the school's fault that the kids are having parents influence?
Well, the fact that the schools are allowing kids to bring electronics into classrooms, phones and all that stuff. If the school had a rule that said no phones, no electronics allowed, unless it's a laptop, obviously, then it would fall on the parents. Because then they're not checking the school, their children's stuff before they leave, saying, no, you're not allowed to have this in school. But if the school's allowing it, then in my opinion, it's the school's fault. But also, I agree as well, parent ultimately has the say-so before the children leave their house. No, you're at school to learn, not to text, not to be on your phone. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and I think you both kind of covered it there, that's ultimately, and to answer your question, how do you deal with the outside world? You deal with it kind of the same way you have to, and that is you're dealing with the outside world, right? Hopefully you're still walking the walk of God, right? And what you do to do that is you probably turn to God when you're in a situation where you're tempted, right? So you got to teach your children the same thing. Teach them how to handle those situations where they might be tempted or where they might find themselves in a place that is not ideal, right? And it's a long walk. It's not something that's, unfortunately, it's not overnight. I wish it were. I wish we could all just push a button. There was a perfect button on our kid, but there isn't one. And so we've got to deal with them, lumps, warts, and all. And that's okay. That's part of it. But you just keep going and continue to give. The biggest thing I can say is you mimic what you want them to be. If you want them to be a godly person, be a godly person yourself. And that will go further than anything you can do. Yes?
I was just going to say, it's a challenge everywhere, not there's things that we do, you know, like we don't have phones, and what I mean, we don't have Cheyenne have a phone on Sundays. But even with us putting that boundary in place, it gets challenged because sometimes when she's here, she's cuddled up, you know, to a friend that has a phone, and so she still has access to it. And so even within a church, that's something that you can't really, you know, eliminate everywhere. The reason why I brought that is because even in a church, you have different opinions about what is acceptable
Sure.
and what's not acceptable.
Sure.
So it's very difficult when we're not necessarily all on the same page with how things should be, or what things are good and what things are not.
Right.
So, I mean, it makes it very difficult because then you end up being in a situation where the child is looking at you like you're this overbearing parent because you're not allowing this and you're not allowing that. But other friends who have parents who supposedly think like you because they're Christian
Sure.
are letting things, you know, or having things, you know, in place that.
Sure.
And we try to explain that, you know, everybody doesn't have the same challenges, you know. We're not supposed to decide what goes on in everybody else's family. Our job is to make sure that you are protected for
Right.
this, that, and the other.
Right.
And it's really difficult because we do want her to make a choice to not have that interfering with worship or interfering with whatever. But she doesn't take the stand to do that because she has an opportunity to see and do what she wants to do, even
Sure.
when we put boundaries in place.
Sure.
Here's another reference. Cheyenne's got a teacher that'll give you extra credit if you put your phone away in the cubby during her class. How many kids you think put their phone in the cubby?
Probably not many. Yeah.
Whether they're failing, passing,
Sure.
how many phones you think really end up in that cubby?
Sure.
I think that's a noble gesture, but really?
Yeah. 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 Phones are a difficult thing. Go ahead.
District 2 does have a policy, no phones on campus. However, it is such a nightmare to police it because you're going to be taking, case in point, about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, a teacher took a phone from a student and put it in her desk, was going to take it to her office. Somebody stole the phone out of her desk, now the teacher's liable for the phone. Okay, so if there was a uniform blanket of protocol of what to do, that somebody was in charge of the phones, it might be stopped, but I seriously doubt it at this point. It's never going to stop.
Yeah, no.
Because if you allow it, you condone it, even though there's a rule.
Yeah.
At Greg, the first time they took the phone, parents had to come back and get it. You know, second time, then there was a $25 fee. Third time, there was a $50 fee.
Right.
It was quite a hoot to walk in the buildings in the morning, and they would have the phones locked up in the file cabinet, and you would hear them all ringing. And it was such a hoot. You would hear, because they wouldn't let them cut the phones off.
Right.
They leave the phones, and some parents would let them stay in there for the rest of the month to teach the kid a lesson. And you hear that phone, you just hear, 8 or 10 rings going on for the 10 minutes you were in the office. So we took them anyway, but it's a pain.
Sure. Well, one thing with my daughter, and her schools have always had a policy, no phones, right? But in my case, I asked for a waiver of that. But my daughter, and I told my daughter, look, I need you to be available if I need you to call somebody or whatever if I have a problem. So she always had the understanding that that's a privilege that's not, to be abused. So her and I have had an agreement that, I'm going to ask the school to let you use the phone, and it's not for you to use it during class. It's not for any of those things. It's not to play on. It's if I need help, you're there for me, right? And so I've had that conversation with her. She has yet to have a teacher tell me that she's ever taken the phone out of her pocket unless it's because I texted her. Now, does that always work? I don't know. I mean, I hope it will always work with her. But the world is very difficult with phones right now, and very hard to keep your kids on track with social media and TikTok and all these things. And the algorithms within these social media sites are designed to feed them certain things, there's no doubt. And it's designed to tear them down, literally. So, yes.
I know, completely off topic, but I was just telling her this the other day. I said, isn't it absolutely absurd how they feel like they've lost everything? Even if they lost their phone for 30 minutes, it's the end of the world. I said, that's a problem.
That is a
When a kid relies on that so much, that we found joy in digging a hole and when we were young and
Sure.
playing in a hole, you know?
Sure.
And they got a room full of everything that kids would die for. But that one thing
Sure.
is what they thrive for, they live for. That's
Sure.
a problem.
Yeah.
And you were right about the algorithm because they just released another thing about TikTok about how they just changed that up now. And basically, you're right, it's dumbing the children down. It's giving them access to everything they need to just make them watch this stuff over and over, just to reprogram their minds. And
Sure.
it literally is designed to destroy humanity. Turn on everybody.
Unfortunately, absolutely true. And it's not something, other than limiting the phone time your child has, there isn't a whole lot you can do about it. And that isn't a bad idea. My daughter, with her, I always used to tell her, I know where you're going. And I did, I checked. I know where you're going. I know what sites you're going to. And this is a privilege. This is not it's not a right. You don't have a right to a phone. It's a privilege. And if you abuse the privilege, I'll take it. And I won't think twice. And you'll never have a phone again until you buy one yourself.
Yeah, at least not until
Right. So it's a privilege, and let them understand it's a privilege. And if they abuse it, and check, right? If they're doing things that are inappropriate, check. Just as you would any other thing that they're doing that might be inappropriate, check. And if they're doing things that are unhealthy, step in, because that's your job. Yeah.
I even see it where I work, most of the kids are teenagers, that's working on the registry. And the policy is no phone there. They all have phones in their pocket. Then they come to me, well, management's walking around with their phone talking. And you know it's not business. And I go, that's not your problem. Your problem is there's a policy in place and you need to do what's right.
Sure.
And all they didn't want to hear that either, but it's hard to deal with because they see it.
Sure.
Double standard.
Sure. Well, and it is a double standard throughout the world for everything right now.
Yeah.
What is right is wrong, what is up is down. The Bible said it would be that way. And it is. It's exactly what the Bible said. Children will not obey their parents. There's lawlessness everywhere. I mean, we're looking at the fruit of what we've sown. And unfortunately, that is what it is. You see people now that can't even drive their car without being on their phone. And they literally at the lights, you're waiting more at lights now because people can't seem to get their phone out of their hand, even in the car, which is dangerous. It's stupid. Yes.
And it's a danger in making kids believe or feel like if they purchase something that they have full autonomy over it too. We literally had to have Cheyenne's counsel tell her that, she can expect a parent to take something away from you even if you pay for it.
That's right.
If you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
That's right.
I would never, as a kid, have had to have somebody tell me that. That's just something that we as kids knew that if I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, I don't care how much money I spend on this.
Right.
If that's what needed to be taken, my brother or whatever would have taken it. And
Right.
for us to be in a situation where we have to have somebody almost rubber stamp what we're doing so she can understand that it's valid, that is frustrating.
Well, the reason why is the world is teaching our children that their parents are not the person that's in charge.
That's exactly what's going on.
I literally told her that day, Charles, if you buy a hand grenade online, you can best believe I want control of what they do with that hand grenade.
Sure.
So think about it any way you want
Sure.
to, but that's where we're at.
It's just taking away their logic too. I mean, their she's like, she can't understand why they're showing this, that, and the other on, whatever she was watching, on the phone. Like, well, the phone takes you where you tell it you want to go.
Sure.
That's what that algorithm does. And if
Sure.
you indulge in this and you indulge in that, it'll keep feeding you
Oh, yeah.
that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And we had to, as long as you are, how do you not know that? Apparently, that's what you like because that's what your phone is doing.
Sure.
So, I'm hoping, speaking those kind of things into her life and showing her that you have the power to make those choices and the consequences that come behind it.
Right.
Will help her, but everything is a challenge right now.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. And again, it's a lot of it stems from the world wants our children to believe that we're not the ones in charge. They want the village to be in charge instead of the parent.
Unless the village is Christian, then they don't.
Yeah, well, we have to be the ones that are in charge because the village will never raise your child right. Just be blunt with you. All right, let's read the next set of verses here that go along with this. And again, these are the wise son. I'm going to read them. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. Again, going back to that glad heart that we get from a child who's living the life of Christianity. He who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. 28:7, the one who keeps the law is a son with understanding, but a companion of gluttons shames his father. The wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. So the wise man now turns from his parents and addresses himself here to children, probably to his own child, right? And same thing, could we be happy to see our child honored in the world, admired, talented, prosperous, but not be godly, right? For us as Christians, as much as they may, whatever they aspire to be, as much success as they have in the world, we're hoping that it's not just success in the world that they have, but they also have a relationship with Christ. Because we know that all those things that the world wants them to chase are fleeting. They're temporary. And so ultimately, if your heart, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart will too be glad. If they're wise, we're glad because we know that they are going to live that life that we would live, or we would have them live, and then have eternity with us after, right? And so even though we want them to have a Christian life, I see a lot of times parents will get wrapped up in worrying about all those other things. My son is in football, my son is doing this, that, and the other. And you'll hear them talk about all these different things that the world wants them to chase, their children to chase, and they're chasing it with them. And that's great, but make sure you're also giving that same amount of weight to Christianity, that same amount of weight to their chase of wisdom. Because if you're always talking to them about, well, your football game, son, that's, what are you going to do next week? But you never say, son, how was Bible reading this morning? Then I'm sorry, you're feeding into what the world wants you to do. And that is to put the world above God. And that's, as parents, that's what we can't do. We have to be the opposite of the world. We have to raise our children as God would have them raised, not as the world. So be careful that it's great to have other activities, but make sure that there's also religion being thrown in here, right? That it's being not left out. For all these other activities, dance and football and whatever. Make sure that they also have the Christian side of that too, as an activity, right? And I'm a firm believer in Sunday or Bible study at home, Sunday school at home, if you will. My family just started on. We're going to use we've been picking just verses at random. But we're going to use Spurgeon's devotional Bible for our studies going forward for a while and just see how it works. And that way it picks the verse for us, and then we talk about the verse and his lesson and all that. So I'm a firm believer in that's a great way of showing your children how important Christianity is in your life, right? Not just football, not just, soccer, not just dance class. And treat it as you would that dance class or that karate class that they go to. You never miss those, so don't miss this either. You always, talk those up, talk this up too. Make it exciting, make it fun. But if you treat it as a chore, they'll treat it as a chore. If you treat it as fun, eventually they'll treat it as fun, or they'll at least give in and quit griping about it eventually. My daughter don't gripe anymore. She just, does it, thankfully. But there was a time she griped, just like every child, and still does. But hey, that's part of it too. We have to be their voice that they can't, they don't have yet, right? We have to be the voice that they're learning to become. All right. He who loves wisdom makes his father glad, but a companion of prostitutes squanders his wealth. Again, folly, and here it's talking about the folly of immorality, sexual immorality, obviously. And it's saying that obviously one of the things that we've got to teach our children is that immorality will lead to other things, right? In this case, squanders wealth. That will lead to loss of money or loss of station in life or loss of character, loss of reputation. One way or another, it leads to loss. And ultimately, we're to teach them that. The one who keeps the law is son with understanding, but a companion of gluttons shames his father. A companion of gluttons, what it's referring to there is someone that is always looking for pleasure, always looking for their own satisfaction, rather than looking for doing what is right, right? And so he's saying the one who keeps the law is the son of understanding, right? He has understanding of God, understanding of wisdom. But a companion of gluttons shames his father. And the reason, again, is if they are constantly looking for only their own pleasure, then ultimately that father is going to feel shame for that, because he's going to feel, I didn't teach him well enough. I didn't train him well enough or teach him well enough in the way of God. And so then it becomes shameful for the father. The wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. A babbling fool is somebody that obviously is a fool that just, babbles on, doesn't come to anything but frivolity in their life, right? And I know we all know them. Those are the people that are just, they're always gossiping, they're always talking about something, they can't seem to stop, right? And they're never focusing on the important things in life, only those things that either bring wicked pleasure or pleasure. And they're talking about stuff that's inconsequential, never anything important. And so ultimately, the wise of heart will receive commandments. And a babbling fool, because they're talking so much, they're not receiving commandments. They're always talking. And that's effectively what it's trying to get across here, is that person who's always babbling will never be able to receive the commandments because they're talking more than they hear. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Rod and reproof means correct your children. Correcting your children doesn't necessarily mean yelling at them. It doesn't necessarily mean spanking them. Doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. But it does mean you need to correct them. You need to show them what behavior they're doing wrong, and show them how to do that behavior correctly. And there has to be consequence. If there is no consequence, there is no lesson. If there is no consequence, then why should they listen? And the same thing. There's a consequence for you ultimately in life, in everything that we do, is there not? And so if there isn't consequence for your children, they're not going to learn what you already know. There is a consequence when you're an adult. So make sure there's a consequence when they're a child so that they don't have to face it when they're an adult. All right, we're at the end of class, sorry. Who'd like to say a prayer for me, and we'll wrap everything up. You got it? All right.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for Proverbs, the knowledge and wisdom that is in there. Let us all use that to be better leaders, better parents, husbands, fathers, teachers for our homes and for others to see. Lord, thank you for Charles and using him as a vessel to give us that word and that knowledge. Lord, as we move on to service today, I ask that you use Pastor Jim in a mighty way. Give him the words to say, the wisdom, the knowledge, and let us all absorb that. Allow us to have open hearts and open minds to really just take in your word, and that way we can be a light to others. once again, I thank you for today, and we praise this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for bearing with me today. Have a great week, and I'll see you all later.
Thank you.